I'm Professor Marc-André Léger from the John Molson School of Business, and this is the lecture on Lesson 12 on Information Security Standards for the Business Technology Management course, Business Information Systems Risks, Security, and Audit, also known as B. So here we're going to be talking about the different information security standards and also U.S. compliance laws that relate to real-world applications, keeping in mind that we're going to try to contextualize that in our Canadian context, as Concordia is located in Montreal, but the book that we're using has more of a U.S. focus. But still, this applies to us because of our close proximity. Most of our organizations are evolving and involved in the U.S. market, so it doesn't. The legal framework is relatively similar. So some of the key aspects: ISO 17799, 27002, the PCI DSS. So keeping in mind that we're going to want to use standards because it helps us to position ourselves and create a competitive marketplace for hardware and software vendors. It shows compatibility between different products and different services. It provides guidelines to ensure that the products that we're using are going to be able to work together. Many of the standard organizations that are relevant to us in our context, of course, in the U.S., the NIST standards, the National Institute of Science and Technology. But as we know, we've mentioned the NIST before because a lot of the cybersecurity framework standards are very, very relevant to us and also state of the art as far as knowledge goes in cybersecurity implementation and operations. The ISO standards, so the international standards for organization, ISO, which has many different standards out there that relate to cybersecurity. There's a whole group of standards relating to that are implemented by the ISO and different subcommittees within the ISO. Keeping in mind that this is a very broad group and very diverse group of individuals who are involved in these processes, and it's a consensus-based process, so not necessarily a state-of-the-art as some of the things we get from NIST, but definitely a very good reference. Most of the ISO standards that relate to us are also in line with the IEC. So this is the International Organization for Standardization, working with the International Electrotechnical Commission. So very often we're going to see ISO standards that are actually ISO/IEC. And so that's this other group here that is, closely working with ISO on many of their more technical standards. Web-related stuff, which obviously has a lot of implications because most of what we're doing today from IT security relates to cybersecurity, security on the global network that is the internet, and so connected. And so obviously World Wide Web stuff is very relevant. IETF, this is the Internet Society group that handles how the internet actually works from a more technical point of view and creates a whole bunch of documents known as RFCs, or requests for comments, that determine many of the underlying standards that are required to create the internet and the interconnected network that we have. So that's the IETF that does that. IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, a lot of technical standards as well, such as the IEEE 802.11 that have to do with Wi-Fi, or the 802 in general that relate to networking, or the 802.3 family that has to do with Ethernet networks, like the cable wired networks that most of us use today when we're plugging into a network. These are all from IEEE, and so there's a lot of security considerations in those as well. As far as telecommunications go and phones, Cell phones, that's the ITU, so the International Telecommunication Union, and that has a big group that does the telecommunication sector stuff. ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, that relates to a lot of standards that affect a lot of the equipment that we're using. In Canada, the Canadian Standards Association and the Underwriters Laboratory are basically doing part of what this ANSI is doing in the U.S. ETSI, which is the Cybersecurity Technical Committee, the TC Cyber, so that's another group as well that interests us. So NIST, which is a federal U.S. agency, and it's promoting U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness. So it has a whole bunch of different standards that relate to us, and it maintains many standards and publications. So you can go and look at those on their website. Certainly a lot of their publications we've already been referring to in this course. The ISO, so this is a non-governmental organization, an NGO. And so it's developing international standards for pretty much all the industries that you can think about. There's 161 national standards institutes, so a global network of all the different countries who are participating in ISO standards. It has, in participating in the different standard committees, has people from the private sectors, but also from public sector organizations. So people from the government and other groups. I myself participated for many years in the ISO standard committees. And the OSI, that, as BTM students, you're probably familiar with, this is an ISO standard. So the 7-layer model that we've been using and that I'm sure you saw in some of your other courses. I know I teach them in some of the other BTM courses that I teach here. And so how we can model how machines and applications are talking to other machines and applications. That's the 7-layer reference model that we're using, known as the OSI model, for system interconnection model, open system interconnection model. So that's an ISO OSI model. Well, the ISO is ISO, the International Standards Organization. I mentioned the IEC, so that works very closely with ISO and many standards. This is involved very much in technology-related standards for electrical and electronic devices, things like power generation, semiconductors, telecom, physical computer networking, hardware, etc. So that's their main focus. And so they're collaborate with ISO on many things. Standards like XML or CSS or HTML that we're using on the web. This is all the W3C, so the World Wide Web Consortium. So that's its main focus in making sure that the web can work in a coherent, compatible manner with all the different players involved. The IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force of ISOC, so the international organization that handles how the internet is connecting, so the Internet Society, ISOC. And so it's looking at all the things that have to do with how the internet is connecting and working and interoperating. So obviously it's going to have a lot to do with the W3C and also with the ISO and the IEC for all the more technical aspects of it. So the IETF has these documents that are called the RFCs, and those are the different standards that are involved in the IETF standards. And so these RFCs are basically, there's a whole bunch of them that define, what is HTTP, what is HTML, what is ping, how do you ping, what is ICMP, what is the simple mail transfer protocol, what is POP3, what is all these different standards that you might have seen in one of the early labs when we were using the protocol analyzers, all these little these little protocols that were being used. They're all based on RFCs. The Internet Architecture Board, so this is a subcommittee of the IETF, part of the advisory to the ISOC, to the Internet Society. and just making sure, how is the internet going to be working, and how we're going to be thinking about the global architecture of how the internet is going to work, and what are the different things that we need in order to make this work. So that's that part of it. The IEEE, so this is an international nonprofit organization of electricity and electronics engineers. You don't necessarily have to be an engineer to be a member of it. Like us here in the BTM program, we're IT people. There's actually a part of IETF that has to do with IT stuff, like the IEEE standards relating to wireless and these things. However, in many countries, people who do what we do here in BTM are called engineers. It's just that in Canada, engineering has a specific meaning and specific belonging to that group. But as IT people, we could actually belong. I belonged for many years to IEEE. So give you an example of some IEEE standards that are well known. The 802, so these are the networking stuff. 802.1, the LAN protocols. 802.3, that's Ethernet. 802.11 is the wireless stuff, and then there's a whole bunch of other related part of the 802 group of standards of IEEE. So these are all the